Okay, so you're browsing the bookstore, right? And you always see those C.S. Lewis books, like they're just hanging out in the classics section.
Oh, absolutely, always there.
And Mere Christianity, that title, it's always kind of intrigued me. Like, what makes something mere Christianity? What's he getting at?
It's so simple, but it really makes you think.
Totally. So in this deep dive, we're tackling Lewis's argument for God's existence, but like through this really interesting lens. He starts with this idea of a universal moral code, something we all seem to share.
It's brilliant because it's so relatable. He starts with everyday experiences, like even something as simple as an argument.
Yeah. Like picture two people arguing could be about anything, right? But he points out just the fact they're arguing, one person saying, hey, that's not fair, it means they both agree on something way bigger.
Exactly. They might disagree on the details, but they're both appealing to some standard of behavior, this sense of right and wrong that's kind of outside of them.
So it's like, even when we're being totally irrational, there's this deeper sense of how we should be acting. Lewis calls it the law of nature, but not like gravity or anything, more like the law of how humans ought to behave.
And that, according to Lewis, is a big deal. It suggests we're hardwired with this understanding of right and wrong. A moral compass is not just our own opinion.
But hold on a second. What about those people who say morals change over time, different cultures, different values, right? Doesn't that kind of mess with Lewis's whole point?
It's a common counterargument for sure. Lewis actually addresses it head on. He acknowledges there are surface-level differences, but says if you look at the core principles, it's actually super consistent across cultures and history.
Like some universal truths about how we treat each other.
Exactly. He uses the example of a soldier being praised for cowardice in battle, like no society does that, ever. Or the golden rule, treat others as you'd want to be treated. It pops up in Confucianism, Taoism, Christianity, all over.
Okay, that's a pretty strong argument, but couldn't it just be instinct? Like we evolved to cooperate, so we have these moral impulses.
That's where Lewis gets really interesting. He says, if morality was just instinct, then the strongest instinct should always win, right? Self-preservation, that kind of thing.
It's true, the fight or flight should take over, but it doesn't always.
Exactly. People rush into danger to help strangers all the time. Clearly, something else is going on there.
So it's more than just survival of the fittest when it comes to morality.
Exactly. And Lewis says, even if we learn these morals, like from our parents or society,
Yeah.
that doesn't make them any less real. Like we learn math in school, but that doesn't mean math is just a made-up thing.
Just means someone taught us the rules of a system that already exists.
Exactly. So learning about right and wrong doesn't mean it's not objectively true. It might just mean we're being shown something that's bigger than us.
Okay, so how does Lewis go from this universal moral law, the sense of right and wrong, to the existence of something bigger? Like, how do we get from there to God?
That's where things get really mind-blowing, and where Lewis's argument takes this fascinating turn. He says this moral compass, it's not just some random human invention, it's a hint, like a whisper of something beyond ourselves.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. Tell me more about this whisper, this connection to something bigger.
Well, he argues that science, as amazing as it is, can explain how W things work, but it struggles with the WHY. Science can map the brain, observe our actions, but it can't fully answer the question of why the universe exists at all, or why we humans seem uniquely bothered by this whole morality thing.
It's like science gives us the pieces, but not necessarily the instruction manual. We know the what, but not the why.
Exactly. And that's where Lewis introduces these two contrasting views of the universe.
Yeah.
The materialist view versus the religious view. Don't worry, he's not picking sides just yet, but it sets up his argument really well.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break down these two views for me. What's the difference?
So the materialist view basically says all that exists is matter and energy, right? The stuff science can measure, the universe just stays IS, maybe eternally, no real purpose or anything.
Kind of a bleak outlook, if you ask me. So what's the alternative?
The religious view proposes there's something more, some kind of mind or intelligence behind the universe, a creator who not only made it, but maybe even has a plan for it.
Okay, so is Lewis saying he's team religious view here? Is that where he's going with this?
He's getting there, but he's very strategic about it. He argues that if a higher power did create the universe, it couldn't prove itself through just more stuff.
Because science would just figure out a way to explain it, right? Oh, look, a new galaxy, just another thing to categorize.
Precisely. A new galaxy, a new element, science would analyze it, categorize it, make it fit into our understanding of the natural world. But Lewis suggests that a creator would need to communicate with us through something science couldn't fully explain, something non-material, something that resonates with us on a deeper level.
And that something is our moral sense. This pull we feel towards a greater good, even if we don't always live up to it.
Exactly. Lewis argues that this innate sense of right and wrong, this feeling that things ought to be a certain way even if they aren't, that's the whisper of something beyond ourselves,
Mm.
a message encoded in our very being.
Wow. That's pretty intense when you think about it that way. So it's less about tangible proof and more about this internal compass we all seem to have. But where does mere Christianity come into all of this? Is he about to go full-blown God exists?
You'd think so, right? But that's where Lewis gets really nuanced, and that's where we'll pick up after a quick break.
All right, so we left off with this whole mere Christianity thing and how Lewis ties this universal moral law to, like, something bigger than us.
Right where we left off. Now, you'd think at this point Lewis would be like, boom, therefore God exists. But he's a little more subtle than that.
Yeah, he's all about building the suspense, taking us along on the journey.
Exactly. He's very intentional. He makes it clear he's just argued for somebody or something behind this moral law.
Yeah.
Not specifically like the God of Christianity yet.
So he's kind of leaving the door open for people of different beliefs to at least say, okay, maybe there's something to this higher power idea.
Exactly. He's setting the stage, not jumping to the finale too quickly. And here's where it gets really cool. He points to this thing we all feel, that gap between how we should be, according to this moral law, and how we actually are.
That whole, ugh, I messed up again feeling, or even just knowing the right thing to do, but it's really hard.
Yes. And Lewis says this gap, this struggle, it's actually important. Christianity, he argues, doesn't start with us being good enough. It starts with us realizing we're not.
That's so interesting. You think of faith as being all about feeling good, having answers, but he's saying it's the opposite.
You'd think so, right? But Lewis says it's realizing we don't measure up, that we fall short of this ideal we sense. That's what makes us need something more.
It's like admitting you don't have all the answers, that we mess up instead of pretending we've got it all figured out.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that gap between who we are and who we feel like we're supposed to be. And that recognition, Lewis says, is what makes the whole message of Christianity even make sense to us in the first place.
Whoa, okay, now I see where this is all going. So it's not about being perfect or earning your way in. It's about saying, I'm not good enough on my own. I need something to help me bridge this gap.
Now you're getting it. It's not about being morally flawless. It's realizing we need something beyond ourselves to even deal with the fact that we're not flawless.
So even if you're not religious, even if you totally disagree with where Lewis ends up, there's still something valuable in just that self-reflection, being aware of your own moral compass and what it's telling you.
Absolutely. Lewis is making us think critically about what we believe and why. Do these ideas come from us? Are they really our own? Or are they pointing to something bigger, something outside of ourselves?
That's what I love about these deep dives, you know. It's not about being told what to think. It's about wrestling with these big questions.
And sometimes you got to get a little intellectually uncomfortable to really learn something.
Yeah,
That's where the growth happens.
totally. But Lewis doesn't stop there. He takes this moral law idea and connects it to how we understand the universe itself. It's actually kind of mind-blowing, and we'll get into all of that right after this.
Oh yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
All right, so we're back, and we're diving into how Lewis connects this universal moral law to the universe itself. It's pretty wild stuff.
It really is. Lewis was big on using logic and reason, even when he's talking about faith. So he takes this moral law, which he says points to something outside of us, and asks, what does this tell us about the universe, about reality itself?
So it's not just about proving a higher power exists, but what that higher power means for how we understand everything.
Exactly. If this moral law is a message from beyond ourselves, Lewis says, then the universe can't be just random, just atoms bouncing around for no reason. There has to be a purpose, a mind behind it all, something that goes beyond just the material world.
That makes sense. Like if there's a message, someone had to send it, right? It's like finding a message in a bottle. There had to be someone who wrote it and tossed it out there.
Perfect analogy. And Lewis suggests that whoever or whatever sent that message, it must be something that understands that ought feeling we've been talking about, that's striving towards something better, something ideal. But here's the really interesting part. He doesn't just leave it there. He goes on to talk about how this connects to Christianity, to its core message.
Okay, so this is where mere Christianity comes full circle. What does Lewis say about that connection?
Well, he says that feeling we talked about, that gap between the ideal, the ought, and how we actually behave, it's essential to Christianity. It's not about being good enough already. It's about recognizing that we're not.
So it's not about earning your way in or being perfect. It's admitting you need help to bridge that gap between who you are and who you feel like you should be.
That's it. Lewis says Christianity starts right there, in that place of humility, of realizing we need something bigger than ourselves. He even says Christianity begins in dismay, not comfort, which is pretty interesting when you think about it.
It really is. Makes you think about what faith is really about, huh?
For sure. Lewis is challenging the idea that faith is about feeling good or having all the answers. He says it's about those tough questions, wrestling with the fact that we want to be good, but we mess up a lot.
So recognizing those flaws, admitting we need help, that's actually the first step to something more meaningful.
That's the heart of it. Recognizing our imperfections opens us up to the possibility of change, of actually moving towards that ideal we feel so strongly.
So it's about the journey, not the destination. Trying to be better, not because we have to, but because we see that there's something truly good worth striving for.
You got it. And that's what's so cool about Lewis's approach. He doesn't shy away from the hard stuff, the messiness of being human. He leans into it, and he wants us to do the same.
He really makes us think critically about what we believe, why we believe it, and what it all means.
Definitely. And sometimes that's what we need to get a little intellectually shaken up so we can really grow.
It's so true. So even if someone listening isn't religious at all or doesn't agree with Lewis's conclusions, just thinking about these things, that inner compass we all seem to have, that's valuable on its own.
Absolutely. Lewis is really prompting us to look inward, to think about where our values come from,
Yeah.
and consider that there might be something bigger than ourselves out there.
It's about being curious, having these conversations, even if they make you think a little. Sometimes the most important discoveries happen when we get a little uncomfortable.
Couldn't agree more. It's about asking those big why questions and seeing where they lead.
And on that note, we've come to the end of our deep dive into C.S. Lewis and mere morality. We hope this sparked some ideas, maybe challenged some assumptions, and encouraged you all to keep thinking about these things.
Thanks for coming along with us on this one. It's been a really thought-provoking journey.
Definitely. Keep those brains working, keep asking those big questions, and we'll catch you all in the next deep dive.
See you next time.